Welcome back, fellow crafters. Another episode of Stuff I Make with Grand Inquisitor Chris. Today's another tips and tricks video for something that you can do in your spare time if you're either suffering from crafting burnout or just wanting to get a little bit ahead. What we're doing here is I'm working on windows. Now, this is going to be similar to the doors in that we're going to go ahead and just basically put some craft sticks down on cardstock. For these craft sticks, I'm using the Skenny Sticks brand. Something that you need to know if you're doing this, these are going to be the shutters because I'm going to make these slightly more fancy for a project I'm working on. But something I discovered in another project, which I haven't run into on this one yet, is that the quality control on these is not exactly the best. I had a few that came out of different bags, I presume, or they were just real poor craftsmanship in one bag. But you want to make sure that the thickness matches, because as you'll see in one of the other projects I have coming up where I actually documented it, some of these craft sticks can be up to a third or a quarter thinner or thicker than the others. So just make sure when you're doing this that these are all the same thickness that you're using. So far I haven't run into the problem on it on this particular one, but just be aware of it. So these are going to be the shutters. Basically what I've done is I've taken two of these, glued them down next to each other, two more, two next to each other, two more. These are going to become the shutters once they fully dry. When I'm finished with this step as far as prepping it, I'll go ahead and set these off to the side to dry with something heavy on them, because they're already starting to warp a little bit. Okay, I'm going to work on the window sills that they will go into. So I'm taking 3 of these craft sticks and using them as a temporary jig. Okay, now for the window sills, I'm going to go ahead and use these smaller craft sticks, which are essentially, I guess they're made out of balsa wood, but they're essentially just a matchstick with no match head on them. You can buy them in big bags at the hobby store for like, I think, $3, and you get a ton of them. What I'm going to do here is make sure they're not too badly warped. Okay. Lay down a line of these, and you'll need to do the same thing with these when they're drying by putting something heavy on them so that they don't start to warp. Also, when you're doing these ones, a lot of them are going to come substantially deformed. Like this one is only roughly half the thickness of any of the others. Okay. Stick that down. Stick that down. Okay. Helps if there's enough glue on it. Okay, so I would be saying welcome back if the camera battery hadn't died while I was recording the last part of the video, or the first part of the video, depending on how you look at things. Okay, so this is a how-to on making some windows during your off time, so that when you have a few extra hours to spend doing something, or you're having a crafting block or whatever, this gives you something to do that you can prepare for a future project. So I was working on windows, and the battery died after I got to the point where I was starting to get things drying. So we're going to remove the heavy objects. Okay. So what I've done here is I've taken some of these Skenny sticks. I've taken 2 at a time and glued them down in pairs. 2 here, another pair here, another pair here, another pair here, here, and here. And what these are going to become is the shutters. Now for the window frame, I went ahead and took some of these craft sticks that are essentially matchsticks with no match head on them. You can get them for like $3 a bag at the hobby store. I think they're made out of balsa wood and they're really flimsy. So what I did was I went ahead and laid down a line of them, took a straight edge. I put glue down on the cardstock, took a straight edge to straighten them out to make sure that they were all straight. Pulled this up, went ahead and put the heavy items on it to let it dry, and that was when I found out that the camera battery had died. So, on to the next step. So I'm taking 3 of these. I'm going to use these as a spacer. Now when you're doing this, you want to look at them to make sure, because this one is already being a problem. As I addressed in one of the previous videos, these craft sticks are not necessarily all straight. Also, there are some other issues that I'll talk about here in a moment. But to use these as a spacer, I want to find 3 that fit together flatly, so that they're not in some weird bowing going on. And these don't have to be perfect. It's nice if things are perfect, but they don't have to be. Okay, not that bottle, this bottle. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a writing instrument. Here we go. And trace a line. And what I'm doing is I'm giving myself a guide for where I'm going to put the glue down at. That way I don't put it off too far up or too far down on this line to create the second half of the windowsill. Okay. I love it when you're waiting for something to happen trying to do a video and it just takes forever. There we go. Putting down a thin line. When you're grabbing the craft sticks out, you're looking for anything that's too bowed, like this one is obviously too bowed. So pull that one out. Okay, that one looks nice. And these are going to be something that once this is done, we can just assemble these little window frames and toss them in a little container. And once they dry, or after they've dried and we've tossed them in a container, we'll have them ready for when we actually do a project, which I already have a project waiting on this. Which you guys will see shortly. Now these are going to warp if you just leave them to dry, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back on and let this go ahead and dry. And come back to you guys in a little while. Okay, so I've allowed these to dry. Unfortunately on this one you can see that it didn't, I went ahead and made another line here. You can see on this one that I didn't weight it down properly, so it did not stay within the lines, it kind of bowed. But that's okay, I've got enough here that I can go ahead and not worry about that. So the next step is going to be to take and cut these off First I'm going to start out with a pair of scissors. These are a little too close to use for scissors, so I'm going to go ahead and just use an X-Acto knife. I'm going to use an X-Acto knife on all this anyway to clean it up. Okay, so we're back. I've gone ahead and these have all dried. I'm going ahead and separating them, cleaning off all of the spare cardstock with an X-Acto knife, and I'm taking and getting it as close to the edge as I can. Because once I cut these, I want to make sure that the cardstock doesn't really show too much once I apply these to a building facade. So now that I've got it at this stage, you can see that I had a couple that didn't, that warped because I didn't weight them down properly. Now, these ones, the shutters, you can see they didn't glue here. I didn't intend for them to, because I want to separate them out for when I cut them. I'm going to be doing these on the bandsaw, so I don't want for them to be as long as they are right now. If you're doing these by hand, you can use something. If you're doing these by hand, you can use these, but I highly recommend against it, because just like when I was talking about in my door video, if you've seen that, when you're using something like this or any of the other cutting implements that we have, they tend to not cut the wood as much as crush it between the cutting surfaces. So it causes the wood to flare out at the end, and it doesn't give you a nice clean finished edge. So if you're going to cut it by hand, my suggestion to get a better edge is to not use these. Use something like scissors that you can get a full cut. Even if you're just using shears, just do something that you can get a full cut in one motion instead of sitting there and clipping your way through it. I'm going to go ahead and finish cleaning these up a little bit, and then I'll get on to the next step. I'll be right back. Okay, so now we're at the stage of going ahead and using the bandsaw a little bit. So, as you may recall, when I was doing the shutters, I said that the window is going to be roughly 3/4 of an inch tall, and each of these is roughly 1/4 of an inch. Not exactly, because they're wood and they can swell, as well as it depends on the accuracy of their measurements at the factory when they cut them. But this will be close enough for what we're doing. Doesn't have to be a functional window, just has to look nice. So what I'm doing is, since each of these is roughly a 1/4 of an inch tall, I'm using these to set my bandsaw so that when I cut the shutters, it should be 3/4 of an inch about. Okay. Now, since I'm using a bandsaw, I can cut multiples at once. So I'm going to do these in pairs. And because the because the wood sticks were a little longer than the cardstock I was using, I'm making sure that these two are done together with the extra cutoff at the end. Okay. That's why you want to support it when you're doing it with your hand. You always have little mistakes like that. Because I'm at this point and I don't have enough to really hold it on this edge, I'm going to go ahead and use a little piece of there's a whole bunch of shutters right there. I still have 3 more to, or 4 more to go. I'm going to go ahead and cut them and set it up for the next step, and I'll be right back. Okay, so continuing on, now I'm going to go ahead and cut some windows. So since the windows are roughly, are going to have the shutters on them, most of them will anyway. Since the shutters are 4 wooden craft sticks wide, I'm going to go ahead and use 4 wooden craft sticks to set my guide. Okay, I had one that was kind of crappy on the end because it didn't fully seat right when I was putting stuff on it to dry. So I went ahead and cut most of that off, but since it's not exactly a good clean cut, I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit right here. So this will go ahead and give me the flat edge that I want. On this one, it bent when it went through because that's where the craft stick ends were. It's not going to be a big deal when we get into the crafting. It won't make a big difference for me. Okay, so this one, the ends didn't quite glue on solidly enough on the very tip, so it came off. We'll fix that up in finishing stages. So this one is a little bit off-sized, so I'm just going to I'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, so there were a few that had a little bit of the edges pop off, and that's fine. I went ahead and repaired those, and now we're at the next step. Now, putting these through the bandsaw, there is going to be a little bit of cleanup to be done. Basically, let me zoom in with the camera. Okay, so you can see that the cardstock has a little bit of a rough edge here on the backs of where it cut. Now, I don't mind that. It's just going to take me like a second a piece to clean that up. But look at how nice and sharp those edges are. And that's why I went ahead and used the bandsaw, because since it's cutting through it, it's not going to be crushing the wood, it's just cutting it out. So to do the cleanup, I'll go back in a little bit. Take it, turn it upside down, take the scissors. I'm putting it up against the scissors here. And there you go. Nice and clean. Do the same things with these, with the shutters. Okay, then because the shutters are cut to size, I can just go ahead and glue these right in there. And if I want to glue them with the shutters closed, basically, if I'm doing them with the shutters open, just put the shutters in here like this. If I'm doing them with the shutters closed, I'll just go ahead and put them in here like this. Now if you're doing the ones with the shutters closed, I'm going to put some tiny wood pieces in here to act as to look like hinges. If you're doing them with the shutters closed, put the hinges on the outside. If you're doing them with the shutters open, put the hinges on the inside. But I'm just going to glue these in place, and I'll be all set. These windows will be all ready to be attached to the outside of houses. I'm going to go ahead and glue these in place, and I will talk to you guys later. And we're back. Okay, so you can see here I've got a bunch of these windows that are already done. They've dried. I made some more windows here using the same method, except instead of putting on the shutters, I just went ahead and cut a piece of the same wood that I was using for the frame to make smaller windows and some longer ones for one of the townhouses I'm working on. I also wanted to go ahead and point out that for some things the bandsaw is really great, but when you're doing something this small, I generally end up having to use the chopper to cut the wood. Now I'm sure a lot of people have one of these, and this is something that I see brought up in a lot of comments sections when someone asks about tools that people use. And this is a good tool occasionally, but I don't really like it for one simple reason, in that if it's something particularly small, I'll use it because I have to. But for some of the larger things, like cutting all these, if I wanted to make all these little straps by hand, let me zoom in. That should do it. Okay. So, on here, let me see if I can get it, how close I can get it. Okay. You can see that it's a nice clean cut on the windowsill. That it gave me a nice flat edge. Not very much, a little bit to clean up here. I think most of that's just fuzz from the table. But you can see how nice and clean that edge is and how square the piece of wood still is. Now, when you're using something like the chopper, this is one of the problems that I have with it. Because you're compressing the wood, let's see if I can tighten it up just a little bit. Okay, so you see this piece right here? because you're compressing the wood, you're not necessarily going to get a nice flat edge, and it, depending on the thickness and hardness of the wood, you may end up getting it to splinter like this. And that can be a big issue depending on how anal retentive you are or what project you're working on. But when I was cutting the little slats for these, for the side frames, the larger pieces of wood, I was ending up with these little bits splintering off the larger sections. So this is one of the reasons that I don't really like using the chopper unless I have to, because like I said, it's not giving me that really straight, clean cut, and because it's compressing the wood even with a razor blade in it, it's still not really a good cutting source. Now when you're doing these, because you're doing them by hand, if you end up with something like this one, you can see that this one was a little bit off when it was drying, so I've got a little bit of a gap here. That's not going to be noticeable on the finished product because when I go ahead and put this on and paint it up, it's going to be nice and dark. If you're doing these houses, something you want to consider is the window size. Now, as you can see here, these windows are fairly large. Oh, I guess I didn't glue that one down. Let's see. Always dry fit things before you glue them, which apparently is what I was doing here and forgot to actually apply the glue. But when you've got these, yeah, this one's glued. You'll notice that this is a fairly large window. If you're doing medieval style houses or anything from, say, the 1890s on back, windows are going to be incredibly expensive. So you're going to see a lot of buildings with smaller windows, and even a small window like this, you're probably not going to see one window pane in it unless it's a relatively well-to-do person. It's probably going to be 4 to 6 or even 8 smaller panes, because smaller panes would be something that would be easier to transport, less likely to break during the travel, and therefore cheaper than having to transport a large pane of glass over a long distance to a house. Also, there's I don't know if it's a worldwide thing. I know that there were people here in the States in the like 1800s and 1700s using mica, and I've actually seen some of the mica sheets at some of the places here on the Mesa where there were old structures, and they're referred to as poor man's glass. And basically it's a piece of mica that's cut to be a piece of glass, and it's transparent. You can look through it, but it's got impurities and distortions in it, so it's not going to be like looking through a regular window glass. It's going to be like looking through a dirty window. It's not going to be brown like a dirty window, but it's going to be distorted enough that it's going to be looking through a dirty window. Also, the mica sheets that I had seen in the shards were probably about 2 to 3 times the thickness of a regular window, but it's just something to think about. But like I said, if you're doing something for medieval houses, you're going to look at a lot smaller panes. So when I paint these, I'll go ahead and probably do 4 panes on each of these windows. These windows will be on a relatively well-to-do house, so these will probably be 2 panes. These ones will probably be 4 to, I don't know, 8 panes or so. I'm not sure yet. It's going to depend on how I feel when I get around to it. For the ones where that I have with the shutters closed, I went ahead and put the little hinges on the outside. I guess that's pretty much all I have to show you guys for the moment. If you like the things that I bring out and show you guys, please leave a like, comment, put any questions that you want in the comment section, and there's links for my PayPal if anyone feels like supporting my craft. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.